Hello and welcome. You're watching QTV and you are watching The Week in Review. I'm your host, Adi Darami, and as ever, I have my friend and colleague, Mamadou Mboj, to co-host with me. Mr. Mboj, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
And I always say this because you never know who's watching for the first time. So this is how the program goes. We take 10 really good stories from the week just past and we discuss them in some detail. And as I always say, let's get cracking, shall we? First story is, of course, the elections were held, presidential election, I should say, December 4th. President Barrow was declared the winner, so he's no longer just president, he's also the president-elect. And next week, he will be inaugurated. Have a look.
The occasion is expected to be graced by thousands, including foreign leaders, as President Barrow gets sworn in for his second mandate as President of the Gambia. He was re-elected with 53% of the vote on December 4, 2021. A coalition of local election observers and international observers endorsed the election as free and fair, despite a rejection of the result by the United Democratic Party, who polled 27.7% of the votes.
There you have it, Mr. Mboj. He has been re-elected and he will be inaugurated for a second time, and it should be a lot less fraught than the last time.
Absolutely. The last time we had two inaugurations.
Absolutely, we did.
One in Dakar Embassy and the other one here at the stadium.
That's right.
Absolutely, and from the sound of things, from what we're hearing, they're planning it all in a pomp and pageantry.
Well, indeed.
That sort of thing, if not exactly extravaganza.
Yeah, quite. So.
But, well, he won handsomely.
He won handsomely, and I was tempted to say the dust has settled and he's going to be inaugurated, but the dust hasn't quite settled. There's still some, there's still a case or two to be heard. I think the day 2 days before the inauguration, the Supreme Court will pronounce on the UDP petition, another of their petitions. And so, but other than that, I think we expect it to go ahead, and you say there'll be pomp and pageantry, and of course, the last time round, after the impasse, he ended up being sworn in Dakar at the embassy there. That, for those of us who are in the UK, it seemed quite a brave and kind of odd thing to do, because I'd never known of an instance before in any country where somebody has said, you know what, this chap is challenging the election, refusing to go, I'm going to go and get sworn in anyway. And he went and got inaugurated in the embassy.
Absolutely. It was a powerful message to Jammeh.
It really was.
Because afterwards, we can call you a rebel. I mean, we can do all sorts of things. So absolutely, it was symbolically highly significant. It was important that we did that.
Yes, indeed. And as I said, this time round, no such drama. Pretty sure there won't be, and he will be inaugurated, and police band, the army and everybody else have been training, and of course we expect quite a few heads of state to come.
Absolutely, yes, as usual, especially Barrow this time as the leader of the National People's Party. They've won in their own right.
Indeed.
You know what I mean? So he would want to send a clear message out there, not just to Gambians, but to the world. So it will add to, as it were, the luster. If you have many presidents around, so naturally, perhaps one would expect, I don't know, Senegal from Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, people like that will come. Absolutely. But for us, perhaps later on, we have to ask ourselves, what's the purpose of these inaugurations?
Yes. It's symbolic.
Absolutely.
I went to Obama's one, and with the first one, the symbolism was that first African-American, first black man to be. And it was amazing because it was a public holiday in the United States, and the bus and the trains in Washington that day all had his picture on their ticket. So the ticket that you would normally buy when it actually, so I still have them as souvenirs.
Absolutely.
So it was, for that it was a big deal. And I guess and you say, what's the purpose? I guess this kind of solidifies it. The person has been elected, and then the law says, the constitution says, there has to be a formal inauguration, and of course that's what we're going through this time. But it's a formality.
Absolutely. But there's something else, going back to that 2009. Remember, didn't he sort of misplace a word and he had to redo everything? So it is very serious, unbelievable. These rituals, the oath,
that's right.
Were
that's
very
right.
serious. So they had to redo all of that.
And in times past, people have made fun of American presidents who've misplaced a word or two in the oath, and also I think Macron, when he was being inaugurated, again, you know, people, and the thing is, essentially you say the same words, and yet, you know, you essentially repeat them, and yet people can sometimes get them wrong, and it shows the kind of nervousness of it.
Absolutely. It couldn't be anything else but nervousness.
No.
And maybe there's something in you really begin to feel the weight.
Sure. Well, indeed.
And then you stumble a bit, you wobble a bit because it's heavy.
And, you know, it's interesting you say that, because when we were talking about this, I used the analogy. I said I have friends who had been living together with their fiancé for 5 years, and at the church, when they were saying their wedding vows, they cried.
Absolutely.
Because somehow, in reciting those vows aloud in front of an audience, something of the enormity of what you're pledging to do suddenly comes upon you, and they cried. And in a kind of presidential sense, when you recite that oath, suddenly the magnitude of the job you're taking looms in front of you.
Absolutely. Ceremonies matter.
Indeed.
In human beings, as it were. We mark events, and we mark transitions.
Indeed.
And it is a transition of some sort that we are marking. Yeah. And with human beings, these things matter. So then that moves me to another point. All right. Once I attend or witness, watch on TV, whatever these rituals, these ceremonies, then what expectations are generated?
Well, usually they're quite high. Usually they're quite high. People start talking about, you know, what's the first cabinet that the president is going to do after? Is he going to reshuffle this person? I've already seen people trying to second guess him by saying he should appoint this person to that ministry and so on. So you'll get that kind of thing, because of course, not long down the line, you've got the National Assembly elections where the NPP will be contesting for the first time nationwide.
Absolutely. And for me, really, one would perhaps also appeal to the person who's going to take the oath. For a long time, we have seen presidents take an oath, but in power, they don't really respect that oath.
Right,
one would hope that in a self-conscious way, our president will actually listen to himself very, very, very carefully and take those words very, very seriously.
Sure.
I think with that intention, that will, that framing, will make a difference in the decisions he makes and what he does in power. I think that's really
it's a crucial point. It's
that's
a crucial
where
point.
I will begin.
And
seen so many
you
know, oaths that didn't mean anything.
They didn't mean anything. And as Mr. Mbod rightly says there, the magnitude of it, and we hope that the president says it and means it. And we look forward to it come Wednesday. Thank you, Mr. Mbod. And now, what was, with no apologies for many of us, the big story of the week. Yes, of course, the Gambia finally made it to AFCON and played their first game.
I'm not expecting much from the boys, even though we all know in reality our preparations are not the best of preparation ahead of the Africa Cup of Nations. And I think, you know, judging from the previous record that we have seen during the international friendlies, that is the FIFA window, we haven't get the best of results, even though the coach will argue that, you know, we lost 3 and won 3. But I think, you know, the expectation might be high on the perspective of the fans, but I think in reality we have a lot of work to do. We are in a very, very tricky group. Mauritania, Mali, Tunisia. Mauritania have already tasted the competition. That is their second time. Mali also was there. I mean, for this their 12th edition. I mean, we have seen Tunisia 2004 winners. So in reality, I think we'll go into competition as the least favorite, the underdogs.
I deliberately chose that bit, Mr. Mboj, because of course anybody watching that knows that it was good to have somebody with a slight tinge of pessimism, because subsequent to that, of course, we all know what happened and what did happen.
Absolutely. Some of us, we were reasonably confident, really.
Yes.
But again, when it happened, there was this relief.
Because almost as if
there was a
relief.
sort of doubt, a secret doubt in there. So that was like, oh, thank God for that.
We breathe a sigh of relief.
Really,
and anybody who's come from Mars and is just tuned into Gambian TV, what happened was Gambia played first ever match in the Africa Cup of Nations against neighbours Mauritania and beat them 1-0. Abdoulaye Jallow, fantastic goal. It wasn't a kind of scrappy goal. It was, in the cliche of football writers, a goal worthy of winning any game, Mr. Mboj.
Absolutely, and apparently he's a Belgium-based player. Fantastic. We couldn't believe it. We were all together, the whole news team. We were together.
Right.
And I think some of them were listening to radio.
That's right.
And that came quicker than
That's
the image.
Right.
As
so
they jumped before we did.
The goal was scored before we saw it scored on the screen.
Absolutely. So there was this euphoric excitement, wasn't it, until even the day after.
Well,
so
indeed, it carried on.
Over. It carried on.
Yeah.
And that sort. But as the chap there said, expectations, let's temper expectations.
We have to manage
the expectations.
I mean, the next match is against Mali, and, you know, in the words of, you know, the kind of cliche in England would be that the Mali coach has already done the Gambia team talk for them because he's completely dismissed Gambia's chances. He even went as far as to say that's 3 points for my team when we face the Gambia, which is quite insulting, really. We hope that they ram it down his throat. But that aside, I mean, we've been quite impressed with the Gambia team because they kind of showed really good game management, good tactical awareness, and thoroughly deserved the win. It wasn't a fluke.
Oh, absolutely. We certainly did against Mauritania. I mean, but and I'm going to tell you this as well. I never for a moment doubted it. You know, my favorite memory of Gambia playing, it was against Mauritania.
Right.
1980 Zone 2, we used to call it.
Yes.
That semi-finals, I remember. They were 1-0 ahead, and then somehow Biri managed to get a penalty somewhere.
Right.
Somehow he scored. Sure. So I was just so confident, even though so much has happened, but yet this psychologically, I was just so confident. We're going to beat them. And on the day, yes, we were a better side.
Yes, without a doubt.
Yes, we didn't play particularly well. It wasn't spectacular.
No.
But we were a better side.
Indeed.
So we hope that the higher the opposition, the tougher the opposition, then that will bring up the mettle in us to match whatever it is.
I agree with you. And as Mr. Mboj says there, it's a tough group, and so we have to manage expectations. But all the teams are ranked higher than us. Tunisia are ranked 4th in Africa. Mali are ranked 9th in Africa, and even Mauritania are 23rd in Africa, where we are 46. So they're all ranked higher, but we've already dispatched one of them. Let's dispatch the other two. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to something a bit more somber. Fire incident in New York, in the Bronx, in which 17 people were killed, last count, 11 of them Gambians. Have a look.
The city's new mayor, Eric Adams, in the first of 2 news conferences, described the numbers as horrific and promised that the city would provide support for the victims, many of whom are Muslim immigrants from the Gambia. We are all feeling this, and we are going to be here for this community to help them navigate through this, he added.
A really tragic incident, and before we go into it, our condolences to the family members. Mr. Mboj, this is one that, given its nature, has gone around the world, but this is a Gambian thing. I know The Guardian in the UK did a brilliant article where they listed and brought to life, if one can forgive that, saying that some of the people who lost their lives by showing their pictures. But this is something that really touched Gambians wherever they are.
Absolutely shocking. I mean, to imagine that building, apparently to Gambians who were living in New York, they used to refer to it as Ture building.
That's right.
That's essentially
like
Ture
Towers, I think. Ture
Tower. That's what Ture Kunda in many ways. So strong was the association
with Gambia.
with Gambians. So with this one, this is really a Gambian bereavement. It's a national, as it were, loss.
Of course.
As it were. So it was a good thing the president, the ministry, and an ambassador in Washington, Dauda Fadera, apparently, went straight to New York.
Yes.
So we gave it sort of the appropriate attention.
That's right.
As it were.
And in America itself, the Gambian community, Gambian Youth Organization, they started a GoFundMe page, which they actually voluntarily suspended on Friday, and they suspended it because they had set out to raise $200,000, and they had raised $1,051,000, and they decided to suspend it, saying, look, you know, we wanted this for funeral expenses and so on, because the state has said that they will provide funds and even rehouse the people whose houses, whose flats are damaged beyond really, but really good response again from the Gambian community in America.
Absolutely, and many would have been displaced.
Well, indeed.
You know, aside from those who died, you have the injured and those alive would have been displaced. So they will get hurt. Absolutely, everybody has run it round. I mean, apparently this is the worst fire, I'm told, in 30 years.
That's right.
In New York.
That's
New
right.
York City.
Which is what prompted President Biden to say this is not just a New York thing; it's a national thing. The whole of America is mourning with you. Actually, sent a statement the day of the fire. So yes, very much a shocking incident, and of course recrimination started immediately. The family in the third floor flat where it started escaped with their lives, and people are now have been, as is the way these days, attacking them on social media. But there was a Dukure family who have kind of made the headlines because all 5 of them unfortunately died. So imagine, out of 11 people who died, 5 were from a single family. And they think that maybe the door was faulty or was locked and they couldn't get out, and all sorts of things. But we've been promised a full investigation, of course.
Yes, and very, very important lessons there. The person fled and didn't shut the door.
They didn't shut the door.
Apparently these are all very important.
Yeah.
This is why we are told that it's really during an emergency that you need to calm down and think.
This is it.
Before you leap,
And it's an interesting analogy you used there about before you leap, because some of the people who gave interviews to the New York Times said there were people who were tempted to jump and they had to persuade them, no, don't do it, from 13, 14, possibly even higher. And others persuaded them, don't do it, the fire service are here and they'll deal with it, and that really stopped them. Otherwise we would have been counting many, many more.
No, that's it. And I've also heard that the fire alarms were sounding, but because they had had so many in the
went
past,
off all the time.
They were taking it seriously. The cry wolf fable.
This is it.
Perhaps that's also another lesson.
Yeah.
I mean, truly, that is still relevant. We should be careful with that. So this is a tragedy. And we, of course, send our condolences. Sure. But perhaps we can learn 1 or 2 lessons for situations like that. But for us, the other day we talked about it. It seems a familiar pattern, doesn't it? Remember the Grenfell
Tower in London.
In London.
Yes.
Such fires somehow, is it a coincidence, tend to happen to buildings where you've got immigrants, ethnic groups, and that sort of thing. So there is a wider social or political...
And I saw people drawing analogies between the two. Because this building, as you said, Toure Tower, and interestingly, one of the Gambians they spoke to said, yes, there are a lot of Gambians here. She said, but actually I estimate that there are people from almost every African country in the across the 19 floors. But yes, again, Grenfell Tower, heavily, peopled by people from immigrant communities, and so many people lost their lives.
Absolutely, being shortchanged. The system somehow shortchanging these buildings, whatever, all the time. So that also must be another factor. We hope that the New York authorities will take into account.
We do indeed, and just finally on that point, I think the authorities went so far as to say that we suspect that some of the people living in this building were undocumented migrants. If that was you and you've been displaced, please, we promise you, if you come forward, we will not prosecute you. So it was good that they put out that message to people to say, look, you know, as you said, and of course, if you're a landlord and you know somebody is an undocumented migrant, you can take liberties because they're not going to report you to the police or to the authorities if they get shoddy, you know, conditions to live in.
At the very least, it's a humane gesture.
Sure.
At the very least,
Exactly.
I mean, what can you do in such circumstances?
Sure.
Otherwise, you will seem callous.
Indeed, indeed. So yeah, so you know, again, our condolences, and we hope those who are suffering and are in hospital, that all of them survive and come out fit and well. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. Now, something completely different. I attended a conference the other week, and one of the things that came up, and of course came up in the recently concluded presidential election, was what? Voting rights for the diaspora. Have a look.
Diaspora voting has been one of the most contentious issues frequently raised within the country's political arena. Despite being regarded as the eighth region of the Gambia for their contribution to national development, especially in terms of remittances, a sizable number of Gambians residing abroad have for decades felt disenfranchised by successive governments, with many charging the lack of political will on the part of previous governments to allow Gambians abroad the opportunity to vote in elections. The Barrow government, to its credit, attempted to make this a reality. However, for various logistical reasons, it never happened. This left diaspora Gambians frustrated, and many yet again left ruing the lack of opportunity to exercise their franchise.
Members of the 8th region still waiting to push their marbles into the hole, Mr. Mboj.
Yes.
This one will run and run, and you know, I don't consider myself a prophet, but for telling my colleagues in the office when it was first raised around January of 2021 that it might happen, I said not in 100 years. We're not ready for it. The logistics and the modalities are not there, and so it proved to be. We're still somewhere away from it, aren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, last year, you're right, in our discussions, when the IEC chairman said that, yes, you know, they will vote, we looked at each other and said, I'm not sure how. You have to put certain things in order first before this can come.
Right.
So, but this is the key now. We keep on using this term, the 8th region, the 8th region. You have to make it meaningful.
Of course, of course.
So it's time to be serious about these things.
Yeah.
Absolutely, put in the mechanisms in place and sort of put them to vote, because it's going to be highly complex.
Sure.
It's not simply people in Europe or America and stuff like that, potentially all over the world.
Sure.
How is it going to be structured?
Well, that's right. And you know, I talked about, there's a phrase I hate using, the modalities, but that was it. And at the conference, it was said that they had things like, I think Oceania was going to be Australia and New Zealand, and then you would have Scandinavia, then you'd have the United Kingdom, then you'd have the United States of America as separate places where people vote and elected. But all of that has to be worked on, agreed, go through Parliament, etc., etc. You know, because the structure. So I gave somebody, and you know, when this was mentioned, people in the office were saying, "Oh, that's good." I said, "Okay, just had that. Supposing they say Scandinavia." Well, they don't say European Union, and I'm in a European Union country that's, say, France, for example, that's not in Scandinavia. Why shouldn't I vote? You know, so you know, so what they said at the conference was that they would take it at countries where there are more than 10,000. Of course, those are the things that need to be worked out. You know, again, the argument comes: supposing there's 9,999 in one country. You know, so it's not an easy one, and I think that's what people need to grasp. That yes, it's a desirable, but it's not an easily deliverable.
Absolutely. I mean, the formula. That's going to be very difficult.
It's a headache.
Anyone who says 9,900 and whatever, well, let's just go back to the law. Being an adult, I can be 17 point whatever months old. If I'm not 18, it doesn't work. So it's got to have a threshold.
There has to be a
threshold. Somewhere. But yes, we expect that by next presidential election, at least. I mean, the parliamentary election this time is a bit too short, and even that, how would it work?
Sure.
So this is it. But certainly, by the next presidential election, 2026, one expects that.
Yeah, that it should have been sorted out, because people were kind of hopeful that it would happen before this year's National Assembly elections, but that's not realistic. No. So we wait and see. But as we said, it's a desirable, because, as was debated at the Stake in the Nation Forum, where you have a region that is always mentioned and then contributes close to $1 billion in remittances, perhaps they should have a say, or should and have some representation to actually kind of take forward some of their aims, ambitions, and dreams. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. And when you look at, for instance, what we call the stakeholders, everybody seems to agree.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Yes, there were no dissenting voices.
No dissenting voices.
Sure.
So let's just look at the actions that we need to do to get there.
Sure.
And just start doing them.
That's it. Exactly. That's the perfect note. The actions we need to do. Let's start doing them. What's stopping us? Thank you, Mr. Mboj. Now, on to our fifth story. GCCI are about to hold their 15th trade fair, but not just any 15th trade fair. Have a look.
We are so looking forward to this year's edition. We are trying everything that we can to make it ready and purposeful for you, so that your objectives are met in terms of networking further, in terms of making sales, in terms of visibility, in terms of really showcasing Gambia, made in Gambia as well.
Mr. Mboj, not just showcasing Gambia, but it will be the first one to be held at the purpose-built fair ground in Bruceby, near Bruceby Phase 2. In fact, it was so unused because of COVID that's where you and I went to get our COVID jab. That's where I certainly went to get my COVID jab.
We went to the QCT complex.
That's right. I went to the what? Yes, it's near QCT.
Okay.
Yes, it's near QCT. But 15 trade fair, and they are expecting exhibitors from around the region. So not just the Gambia, although we heard they mention about make it in the Gambia or made in the Gambia, and they're expecting it to be really big and quite spectacular. Particularly, as I said, it's the first in this purpose-built trade fair.
Yes, I understand that there will be 450 participants.
That's right.
From the ECOWAS region, Europe, Asia, and the like.
Sure.
And the theme, very interesting. The theme, this year's theme, accelerating intra-Africa trade for the realization of the African free continental free trade area through innovation.
Well, that's right. So it's quite good that they've kind of hooked it onto this, because people keep asking, when is this going to be delivered? Can you point to any practical examples of it happening, of it being delivered? And this is one such deliverable. It's trying to encourage the intra, because we've been kind of obsessed with, shall we export to China or to wherever else? Well, hang on, what about exporting to Ivory Coast or Nigeria or Ghana? Why don't you think about that? Or to Guinea-Bissau? So really, this is kind of trying to encourage that and stimulate it in some
absolutely,
ways.
particularly when you put it in the context of that in Africa, only 17% of African exports are intended for other African countries, so intra-Africa trade is really very low. Apparently, when you go to Asia, it's 59%.
That's right.
You go to Europe, 68%.
That's right.
So it's obvious what we need to do. So when the AFTA, whatever was introduced, was it in January, launched in January 2021. Right. Yeah. So we did a piece on that, this piece of news piece on that one. And we realized the sluggish start, unsurprisingly, because of COVID-19
and border closures
sort of
and sure.
But people sort of expect great things to come from this. It may not be the panacea, but people expect great things to come from this free trade area.
We really do, and it's quite an ambitious one when you talk about all the tariffs that have been swept away. And that it really needs to happen, and it's one of these ones where Africa is being forced to walk the walk and not just talk the talk, because we talk about stuff all the time. But on a related note, the kind of interconnectedness we're talking about, ECOWAS recently sort of said, they should sanction Mali for the coup, leaders and plotters saying they wanted to stay for 5 years before elections. And we were told it was unanimous. And then, of course, Guinea, which of course has had its own coup, has announced yesterday that it will not close the border.
Yes.
So straight away the thing has crumbled before it has even gotten off the ground.
Yes.
But this continental free trade area really needs to succeed, because it could really make a huge difference across the African continent.
Oh, absolutely. They say that it will eliminate import tariffs on 97% of goods.
That's right.
That's the ambition. That's what they want to do. Yes, we'll see whether they achieve that. But the other related with the political element, that's it. Still, we are trying to be steady, create these steady democratic countries, but still you'll see that here and there, you're bound to come up with political challenges, as happens in Mali. And just this blanket, this automatic, it seems automatic, doesn't it? Whenever these things happen, they just automatically come and sort of want to impose sanctions and all of these things. Perhaps it might take a bit more of imagination, creativity. There are no templates. No. We really cannot listen to what Western countries say or do or whatever. They're following their own
agenda.
Agenda, their own trajectory. We are slightly different. We can learn from each other, one another. Principles can be transferable. But how do I make the principle work for me
in our
own context? And I have to carry the people with me. Otherwise, we're going to have to impose a lot of things.
This is it.
This is my fear.
And that's not likely to happen. Thank you for that. And just in case anybody's wondering, only one country did not sign up, and that's Eritrea. Unsurprising. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And that takes us nicely onto a break. And after the break, there'll be 5 more stories. So hang around, don't go away.
Looking for the fastest and easiest way to receive money transfers from abroad? Well, QMoney and RIA just made it happen. Now you can receive international money transfer from RIA directly into your QMoney account with no additional cost. Once you receive an SMS alert about your transfer, walk into any QMoney agent across the country to receive your payment for free, or use the money immediately to buy credit, QPower, and other QMoney services. It's fast, safe, and convenient. For more info, call customer care on 133. QMoney, Sinu Calpe. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching QTV and you are watching The Week in Review. I'm Adi Darami, and here with me going through the stories is Mr. Mboj. Mr. Mboj, thank you for your interjections so far.
A pleasure.
And for anybody who's just tuned in after the break, you've missed 5 good stories, but as usual, for those who watch this program, they know, hey, don't worry, there are 5 more stories and they're just as good coming up. And the next one is a really good one. I particularly liked it. Growing up, you hear about, kind of generation gap where, parents don't understand what young people are saying and so on. But what happens if you are the parent of a child who is deaf or hard of hearing? Well, somebody is trying to help remedy that. Have a look.
We are very happy about this project. I am not educated, but with the help of this program, I am even able to learn certain things in English and sign them too. My family depends on me to communicate with my granddaughter because she understands me clearly now.
It brought a lot of improvement to him because at home we do communicate with him easily now, better than before. Though I don't used to stay with the kid that long, but it's like the little time that I spend with him, he has improved a lot. He has improved a lot because now we can send the boy to the shop and go buy some little stuff that the individual needs, or anything that the person told him to buy. He is able to go to the shop and buy stuff like that.
Mr. Mboj, that story there by the Gambia Association of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, I particularly liked, because what it did was it brought parents and the children together to kind of, no other word for it, speak the same language, as it were. And I thought it was a brilliant initiative.
That's exactly what it is. And you wonder, what a lonely world it must be for some of these children. We know how our societies are like. Disadvantaged groups really do not get a look in.
They don't.
In many ways, you know, in our thinking, we don't. Somehow there tend to be some kind of stigma, or this God's will, some sort of fatal attribute, as it were, is given to these things.
Sure.
So when you get these initiatives, you just wish everybody, you know, if you got a family member who is hard of hearing, you and will learn, as it were. Sure. Everybody, parents, siblings, whoever has to really interact with them to learn it. Really, it's really
I loved it. Thank you for that. And you know, for me, I did say that I hope if these children were in school and in classes with children who are not deaf or hard of hearing, I hope the teachers also were part of that. But I wasn't able to find out before this program, but I'll try and find out, because I'm curious about that.
Absolutely, and that would actually take its own special training.
Indeed.
That sort of thing.
That's right, yeah. So thank you for that. And now, staying in the sphere of education, I saw and I heard Mr. Mboj discuss this on the radio, and I think also on TV, possibly on the This Morning program. Social media went wild with teachers complaining about a new pay and grading structure. But it turns out that things weren't quite what they seemed at first. Have a look.
So further reveals that all the analysts they saw were comparisons for the proposed new grading structure for teachers against the current scales of other sectors, which he described as misleading, adding that according to the generic pay and grading implementation plan for ministries, the PMO is yet to meet MOPSI for their final input to review the suitability or otherwise to address their own needs and circumstances.
There you are, Mr. Mboj. We probably won't dwell on this too much, but there is a kind of new public sector grading structure, and it seemed that some people who were teachers had read it or misread it, and as usually happens these days, social media took it to a whole different level. Lots and lots of complaints, to the extent where the Gambia Teachers Union had to come out and say, not quite right.
Absolutely, they misread it.
Yeah, indeed.
That was really what happened. But now we expect these things on social media.
Everybody wants to be first.
Absolutely. So there's really no point in sort of arguing with actuality, if you know what I mean. So it was a good thing. They came out, clarified the situation, and that's it, we'll move on. So we're going to have to learn to live with the social media, just as we have to learn to live with the virus, we are told.
Well, indeed.
So that's how I see it. It's like a virus.
Totally agree with you there. And you know, pun intended, a lesson there for the teachers to learn. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. Now on to a more serious matter. On a daily basis, we are contacted to say there's been a fire and there's been a serious one. I'm thankful that we've not had to cover any where there were any fatalities recently, but nonetheless, what we've seen and heard of people being dispossessed from their homes. Have a look at this one in Bakote.
5 families who once resided in this house are currently homeless after the inferno consumed the entire building on Tuesday evening. The cause of the fire is still unknown, but it started in the first apartment, and before the arrival of the fire service, everything was burnt. Idi Jallo, in whose room the fire started, thanked God that no lives were lost, but said everything they had perished in the fire.
li xew fi de moom courant bi moo maas mi lay nekk bi yëpp lakka ak sun bagage yëpp dara génnut fii nag waaw dara génnut nag waaye kenn deewul nag alhamdulillah rabbil alamin.
There was an electrical failure and my room caught fire and it went on to consume the entire line house. I thank God that there were no casualties, but our belongings are all gone.
No casualties, but our belongings are all gone. Mr. Mboj, we hear this time and time again. And again, before we came on, I thought, let me go through all the fire ones we've covered in there. And almost all of them said, we think it might have been an electrical fault. We're not sure, but we think it might be. In a couple of them, they were 100% sure. We need to do something about this kind of faulty wiring, which we keep hearing about, which can, in the end, you know, cost lives, not just property.
Absolutely, that's what they all tend to say. But what you want here is you want a proper investigation.
Sure.
Then we find out the proper causes of these fires, so that we can learn to take caution.
Yes.
So right now, we really do not have any data.
Well, I was going to come to that point because I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but I did wonder what sort of process is gone into, because, you know, take the United Kingdom example. If a fire happened of that nature, the fire service would do a thorough report, which would be published. And that report has several consequences or implications, including for insurance purposes, which is one of the reasons, apart from anything else. They want to see there wasn't arson, but also they need to know where, you know, if, as routinely everybody has insurance, whether, you know, how much insurance they should pay. Are you aware that those sorts of reports are done individually? Because we have so many fires, I can't believe that they have the time to do that.
I have a feeling
investigation and report.
Yes, but I haven't the slightest doubt that when you go to the fire services, the fire and rescue services, they'll tell you that when they go to an incident afterwards, they will write a report.
Kind of incident report.
They will come and write an incident report. But how much do you have of a proper investigation into what actually caused the fire? Because one can use that data for so much.
This is it.
You know, it gives us a proper, you know, picture of what is going on out there. Is it truly electrical wiring fault? What can we do? Then perhaps from that information, it will guide what regulations we will have in place.
Well, this is it, because I said to somebody again in the office, I said, you know what, if I'm sitting at home and watching QTV and, you know, God forbid, my house burns down and I'm possibly at fault, if anybody comes to ask me, I'll just say, oh, I think it was an electrical fault. Absolutely. It wasn't that I left a candle which got blown over. And so you're right. I mean, unless that kind of investigation is done and is thorough, the data is not there to support, you know, even awareness raising campaigns and so on. Because when you go out, people will say, well, what's your evidence that, you know, I should be doing this rather than doing what I've always done? So it's vital that we get that kind of investigation and that kind of data for the future.
And one can even make the argument that in most things we do, you know, our public institutions, we're taking so much policy, we're taking policy but not really based on data. When you talk to some people, they'll give you anecdotal evidence. They think that is data, as it were. So let us be honest, we really do not have the scientific data that we need, which would be the basis of, you know, our policy making, as it were.
As one of our journalists came to me with a story a couple of years ago and said, you know, there have been a lot of kidnappings in the Gambia all of a sudden. I said, really? I said, what's your evidence? He said, oh, it's all over social media. That's not data.
That is not
That's
data.
just gossip, electronic gossip. You
Absolutely.
know, but that's not data. And you know, without that data, you can't do anything. You can't plan.
You find that sometimes you get into a bit of an argument with people because you sort of confuse facts, opinions, conjecture, or you are hypothesizing. So you have all these different categories, but sometimes you get people who think that opinion is fact. They're having a sort of a problem conceptually separating the two. So you have all sorts of things. That is, for some of us, I mean, who are serious, you have got to have serious people, we're really very careful how to navigate all these stories, all these...
And one has to. And, you know, as I said, you know, I hope that if we have that sort of investigation, we can minimize, cut out these kind of really far too frequent fire incidents.
Oh, absolutely. Virtually hardly a week passes by when we do not have at least one of these reports.
We had 3 this week.
Absolutely.
Just finished.
Yeah. There's something going on. Somebody must, you know, take it by the horn, as it were, and deal with it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that takes us on to our penultimate story, and could not be more different. On QTV News, we're trying to run a series of reports of young people involved in business, young entrepreneurs, and part of it is for us to show that actually you can be young and you can make it here in the Gambia. Have a look.
If you do nothing and say that my brother is abroad, we all have relatives abroad, but a grown man sitting and idling, that should not be that way. If you believe in yourself, you should work and sweat. Some of my boys will come here and ask whether I never get tired, but this is my job, and you must take me like that.
Mr. Job also explains what inspires him to take up a skill in tailoring.
I'm suma bena sister bu bande san gañu na nekon footballer am nga left rek life bi métti mu dem baagwe ak seeni demee fa noonu.
I almost gave up learning skills, but I met a good sister who went through the back way. She was a footballer and was the one who said I should not give up. She motivated me, and I stood my ground and didn't give up. Now I have my own shop, and I'm working with 4 people.
He stood his ground, he didn't give up. Mr. Mboj, one of my obsessions, because, you know, when I came here, I heard lots of young people who their only ambition seemed to be to get the hell out of the Gambia. It kind of disturbed me, and I thought, you know, let's dig. Let's not just kind of look at the surface thing. Let's look at are there opportunities, and are there young people who actually don't think like that? Because sometimes you get the impression from people talk, and they think that all young people just want to run away from the Gambia. But some of them have decided to stick to fight and make it here. And that guy is just one of 100 we could have featured, really.
Absolutely. Alas.
Yes, alas. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. But something else that I've noticed, there was a time when I heard that kind of talk a bit more. Right. I must go back way. I heard it a bit more. But I have to say, I've noticed a sort of shift.
Right.
People will talk about it, but the number has gone down on people who will actually say that they will go and do this.
Sure.
So for me, I'm kind of optimistic in that way.
Yes.
And then these stories, because with this Alas, and there was the Yahya Kebe, the shoes,
who made the shoes,
and then Fatuma Tinjai, the tea.
Yes.
So these examples as well hopefully will inspire.
Yes.
You see, because already we're seeing certain patterns there. All of these people identified something that they wanted to do.
Yes.
In many ways, we all succeed in similar ways. You tend to find sort of similar qualities of character that tend to succeed.
Yes.
We also fail in different ways. But I think when it comes to the success stories, you tend to hear similar terms.
That's right, yes. It's interesting because when I went to the Stake in the Nation forum, in the margins of that forum, was an exhibition by young entrepreneurs. So I went round it and I actually bought some of the things. In fact, I can even say on air, one of them has promised to make Mr. Mboj a bow tie because she said she likes Mr. Mboj's bow tie, and she makes bow ties and neckties.
Absolutely.
But what struck me was that all 14 exhibitors were women.
Yes.
So I said, did they deliberately choose women? I asked the exhibitor, and they said, no. We were all part of a course that was trying to inspire young entrepreneurs, and there were an equal number of men, but all the men dropped out. And they said at least 2 of them have gone on the so-called back way. I was astonished. And I said, for real? And they all said, yes. And, you know, they were giving me the names of these young men. And they said, yes, there was equal number of men and women. But the men, as soon as they encountered any difficulties in their proposed business or sector that they'd gone into, they just jacked it in. And one of the young ladies told me, one of them said, you know what, I'm going to use the rest of the money I've got to go on this back way. And that's what he did. And that was quite astonishing. And so those are some of the people that we will be featuring, because I found them inspirational, that, you know, they'd struggled. And also what was good was they were all at different stages of their entrepreneurship. So some were still running a business from their bedroom and sitting room. Others had moved on to actually own and open shops and were based in fixed premises. So it can be done, it can happen.
Absolutely, but is there something to be learned in the fact that you have more women doing it than you have men? And there's something else. I remember when I was at QIT, Quantum Net Institute of Technology, we used to meet employers regularly.
Right.
Similar complaints.
Right.
There's something we had our boys, Gambian men out there. They really don't like hard work much. You do hear these things being said in many ways. There are so many. Go to any construction site. We know that construction is booming. See, I have my friends who are in construction. They come to me and tell me, what is wrong with our boys? Look at me, I want to employ them, but I end up employing people from Senegal, Guinea, from the coastal region.
Which is what happened at the place that I'm building in Sanyang.
Absolutely.
The builders, apart from the master builder, the builders are all Senegalese.
That's it. So we must sort of have the courage to say this to our own people to help them to change.
Yeah.
There's no need trying to whitewash the situation out there for political gains or commercial gains or whatever. So this is what people out there, employers, this is what they're saying.
Yeah.
So teachers, advocates, people who do advocacy work, we have to take these things on board and see how to address them.
Sure.
It's really
and as I said, for me, I'd assumed by seeing that they're all sort of women-led businesses, I thought that the organizers had deliberately done some sort of women's empowerment thing, but I said no, it was for any young entrepreneurs. It just so happened that all the ones who stuck with it happened to be women.
Oh, right.
I was astonished.
I have a suspicion if you look in so many different areas, it's really women who lead the way. It's just that we are just loud. We think that we are powerful. We are the sort of top dog, as it were, in this gender.
That's right. And I think this top dog thing is what sends them on this back way rather than the kind of stick-to-itivity, as they said, to the business. But yeah. But thank you for that, Mr. Birch.
Well done to the escape.
Oh, indeed, and so to those young entrepreneurs, very, very well done. And that takes us on to our final story. Again, COVID has been, it has ravaged everything. And of course, we keep saying this, for a country that depends very, very heavily on tourism, it has been particularly hard to deal with, including in the sectors such as tourism, guides, people who take people on guided tours and so on. But anyway, have a look at this. Our colleague went to find out.
It's better than last year. It could have been better. It could have been much better, but we thank God for what we have it now. Compared to other places, at least we have some few people that are coming back, and we really appreciate that people still love Gambia, and no matter what the situation is, no matter how COVID is hitting everywhere else, people are still able to come to Gambia.
People are still prepared to come, and no matter what. But nonetheless, it's been quite devastating because, again, we've said this many, many times, a country that depends or relies so heavily on tourism is bound to suffer when something like COVID-19 impacts. But there seem to be green shoots until Omicron.
Absolutely. That's exactly how the best way to put it, because I sort of hang out in the tourism development area,
yes, indeed,
a lot. So I talk to restaurateurs and people around. Certainly, for me, I observe, because I've been living in the area for a very long time now, more than a decade.
Right.
So all these repeat offenders, oh God, repeat tourists.
Repeat visitors. I think you
it's almost like committing a crime, coming here.
Quite.
So all these repeat visitors, I see them, I recognize them in all the various. So they were coming in all these restaurants. So they were beginning to come.
Right.
Exactly. Right. So a lot of people were sort of hopeful, thinking, this time it looks like, it will be reasonably decent at the very least, better than last year's numbers.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then suddenly, Omicron, and all these control measures back in place and stuff. So everything got this spanner in the works, as it were. So I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd said this before. The Minister of Tourism had said he wanted to stimulate something that he said didn't exist, which was a kind of, internal tourism as well as, inter-regional tourism. But again, with Omicron, it's going to be difficult. And this kind of, if people have money, they tend to want to go. But I was pleased when one of my colleagues said that they'd gone to one of these eco lodges in the Gambia for the first time because they couldn't go out, and they absolutely loved it. And I thought, you should be on radio and TV and singing this from the rooftops, because that's what people need to hear, that you can have a brilliant experience even within your own country. Because she said, it suddenly hit her that actually she didn't know her country as well as she thought. She'd kind of just grown up and lived in Greater Banjul and never strayed, and that's the kind of thing. It might be a tough sell because we're just not used to it.
At all. And some of us, we used to do stuff like that, you know, back when we were at high school.
Right.
You know, just take a boat, go to James Island, as we call it then. So we used to do these things. But can you have a critical mass? I mean, where ordinary people can do it just to hire the boat? That was a bit expensive. That sort of thing. So people in a certain class could do all of these things, but I'm not sure whether I've got the critical mass to make it something viable. And there was the infrastructure as well, the roads. Now they're getting better. All of that matters. And what is the attraction? To go anywhere, you know, with the heritage bit, or we are from there, fine, you do it once or twice and that's it.
That's it.
What is really the attraction? This is where you must, to my mind, to my way of thinking, you must invite private sector. They will come with the energy, the imagination and all of that. I don't like the state because they promise so much, they're going to spend so much. I say, you're going to be wasting the state's money, put this somewhere else, bring the private sector, you'll bring in more imagination, more creativity, and that's when perhaps you can create
even more tourists.
More tourists, absolutely.
Great note to end on, Mr. Bush. Thank you for that, and thank you for your interjections throughout. And as ever, I say to the viewers, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.